This is a Makita 3041A corded electric chainsaw. The 30 means that it's got a 30cm bar, so this saw comes with a 12-inch bar, and that is exactly what I wanted. I was searching for a corded saw in the UK with a 12-inch bar, and I could only find two. There's a still one and there's this one. Now the still one comes with a proper cord. This one has only got about a foot of cord, and that is because it's a European version. But the reason that I decided to go for this saw is because it's got a tensioning wheel there for the chain. And for me, that was something I really wanted. I didn't want to use tools to change the tension on the bar, because when you use a chainsaw a lot, you're constantly adjusting the tension on the chain. So for me, the deciding factor was, well, I suppose firstly that it's a Makita, so you know it's a good machine. And secondly, the fact that I can actually tension the bar using this wheel on the chainsaw. So you'll notice that this has got a European 2-pin connection on the end there. It needs to have a Schuko female connection on an extension lead, and I couldn't get hold of one of those, so I made my own, and that is in a video that I've already posted on the unboxing and assembly for this saw. Fairly easy to do, it wasn't particularly expensive. As you can see, it is a 240 volt saw. It's got an 1800 watt motor and a chain speed of 14.5 meters per second, which is pretty good. This is a 10-inch oak log. Let's see what it cuts this like as a first cut. Absolutely no issues with that. In fact, my clamp was getting in the way then, which made it a little bit more difficult, but cut through that with no issues at all. And it's fairly quiet, that's one thing worth mentioning. Now, one of the reasons why I wanted an electric chainsaw was so that I could use it in my workshop. You should never use a petrol chainsaw in the workshop. You could end up with carbon monoxide poisoning. If you want to work indoors, you really do need an electric chainsaw. Now, the reason I've gone for a corded chainsaw is because when you read the reviews of battery operated ones, you just don't get the use out of them. The battery runs out before you can do an awful lot of work. And the reason that I decided to go for this with a 12-inch bar is because I'm going to attempt to do some carving with it. So this is, it's either beech or ash, I'm not sure what it is, but it's 13 inches across. This is a big log, and I'm just going to try and cut the top off. Obviously I'll have to do it in 2 passes. The chain oil is actually filled from the top there, and if I tilt that over, you can see that I've actually got the oil in there. I've already filled it up. I like the idea that you can actually put the chain oil in from the top and not the side. You don't have to lay the saw over in order to put the oil in like you do with most chainsaws. Now if we look at this cable, you can see that it is a European 2-pin plug. This is called a Schuko plug, and I'll actually put links in the video description of what you need in order to get an extension lead for this chainsaw. So this and this are the main 2 reasons why I bought this saw. So this is a tensioning wheel, and the sprocket cover is toolless. So if I just push this down and flick it out, I can undo the sprocket cover to get into the blade and the workings inside. You can see I've not used this saw yet. So if you want to change the blade, you don't need any tools to get at the blade. So I put the sprocket cover back on. If I slacken that off, you can tension the blade, take the tension on or remove the tension. If you look now, right, that's slack, and then you can tension the blade without any tools to whatever tension you want. There, that's about right. And then all you do is tighten up the sprocket cover, push this down, let it clip back in, and that's your blade tension. So when you're using the saw, you can tension the blade very, very easily. And that is a major advantage when you're using one of these things. This is a front handguard. It's designed to protect the operator from a kickback. Normally when you're using the saw, if you're cutting with the saw, you've got held tightly in both hands, but occasionally you can actually get the saw climbing up the wood or whatever it is that you're sawing, and the tendency is for it to flick back like this and hit the operator. Now what happens with this guard is, when it flicks back, it hits your hand and it clamps the blade, so the blade stops instantly and it prevents it from injuring the operator. Now I've been on the receiving end of a kickback. I actually managed to chainsaw my head a few years ago, so I'm well aware of how dangerous these things are. Another thing to point out is when it's activated, so it's pushed forward like this, the motor will not run because there's an interlock in there. You just pull it back like that to reset it. And you cannot start the chainsaw unless you press this button along with the trigger. So button and trigger and it will start the chainsaw. So this is the solution that I went with, which is an adapter that I got from Amazon for £3.06. I already had the cable with the plug on the end, so it was just a case of fitting this onto this, and then I'm ready to go with the chainsaw. So if I show you the adapter, you can see that it's a Schuko European adapter there. 16 amp it's rated at. So just plug the chainsaw into the adapter. So this is a little cable tie, is about the best way to describe it. I know it's not a cable tie, but it's the same type of thing. And it's designed to stop you from pulling the extension lead off the cable when you're using the saw. And it's quite simple to use. You just get the cable on your extension lead, push it through there, around and through there, like that. And that just stops you from being able to pull the extension lead off the power cord. Now I would imagine that one of the uses that people will want to put one of these saws to with a smaller bar is for cutting firewood. So I'll just cut this several times so we can see what it's like for chopping logs for firewood. So what I'm going to do now is demonstrate how this lock works and how effective it is at protecting you if you get a kickback. Now, the best way to describe a kickback is that the blade, when it's rotating, is going around this way. If you put this blade into the wood from the bottom, because the chain is moving that way, it's going to pull the blade back and flick it up like this. That's a classic way that people get kickbacks on these saws. I'll tilt it back until the lock comes in and we'll see what happens. Now my finger is still on the trigger, so I haven't taken my finger off the trigger. It stopped that blade instantly. So that is going to stop it from doing this, and I have got a scar on my head where that happened to me with a much bigger chainsaw many years ago, and I had to go to hospital and get looked at because it was quite bad. So this thing prevents that from happening. Now what I was doing at the time, I wasn't holding the chainsaw properly when it happened to me, and it kicked back like this and it never activated the lever. So you need to be very careful how you use one of these things. So if you look, I can't run the chainsaw if I pull this back. So there's an interlock there to stop you from actually turning the chainsaw on when the lock's on. So the next thing I'm going to demonstrate is rip cutting. In other words, I'm not cutting it across the grain, I'm cutting it along the grain. Now one thing I'll point out is if you look there, right, you've got a toothed attachment on the saw. That is designed to push into the wood and allow you to lever the saw, so it makes cutting it easy. And I'll demonstrate that now. So I'm going to use the saw without using that and we'll see what happens. And what's happening is I'm pulling against the saw, so I'm pulling back towards me to stop the saw from being pulled forward into the wood. Now I'll let this bar touch the wood and I'll use it as a lever to lever the saw, and you'll see it's a much quicker operation. So yeah, I'm pretty sure this saw is going to do what I want it to do. I'm quite pleased with that. So absolutely no issues with cutting along the grain. That's a bit pathetic really, but it does give you an idea. So hopefully I've given you guys a good idea of what this chainsaw is like. I'm very impressed with it, I'm very pleased with it. Just looking in the oil tank and I can see that it's virtually full, so it's used very little oil, the small amount of chainsawing that I've done. Love the fact that you can actually tension the chain without any tools, and that is a major advantage when you're doing a lot of chainsawing. And the fact that you can actually change the chain without any tools as well. I think it's got brilliant safety features. I love the fact that the guard there disables the motor if it actually kicks in, and you must remember that when you're using this saw, if you can't get it to run, it's probably going to be that. It feels really solid and it is a really well made saw. I've gone for a 12-inch bar because I am going to attempt carving, as I said earlier. Now, I could have bought a 12-inch petrol chainsaw quite easily, but I couldn't use it in the garage, and I want to actually be working inside my workshop. I don't want to have to work outside. And I will be doing work outside as well, but this gives you the best of both worlds. It's cheap compared to a petrol chainsaw, a lot more convenient in many ways. The only way it's not convenient is the fact that it's got a cable. But sometimes that's an advantage because you don't have to mix oil, you're not making as much noise, it's much quieter than a normal chainsaw. And personally, for the money I paid for it, I am very happy. Now, I hope you've enjoyed this review, I hope you found it useful, and thank you very much for watching.